In school at a young age, children in the United States are taught about our first president, George Washington, the general that made the American Revolution possible, the man that the nation's capital is named after, kind of. The Evergreen State is named after, he chopped down cherry tree, and he has his head on a frickin' mountain. However, Washington wasn't the first president that the United States had. 8 years existed between the time between Washington becoming president and when the first U.S. Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, were signed. Compared to the modern U.S. Congress, an executive branch didn't exist, and the position as president was largely symbolic, as they lacked much in the way of power. Regardless, this tidbit of history shouldn't be forgotten, and so in this video, we'll be looking at the 8, yes, you heard that correctly, 8 US presidents prior to George Washington. The first president of the United States under the Articles of Confederation was John Hanson from Maryland in 1781. Hanson attempted to resign immediately after being elected. However, the Articles didn't establish a way to nominate a successor, so he was sort of forced to stay on as president. Hanson was the Maryland's delegate to the Congress and had been known for his role in financing the war in Western Maryland, and he was appointed to many financial positions. Maryland was reluctant to pass the Articles during this time, the main holdup being that many states had claims to land west of the Appalachian Mountains. As Maryland herself lacked any claims, they refused to sign on until the other states dropped their claims, which the other states finally did, some stating that Hanson played a critical role in the compromise. Hanson was the individual to sign onto the Articles as Maryland's delegation. Being the country's first full-term president under the Articles meant that he oversaw programs that helped to establish daily life in the new country. For instance, Hanson held the position of president when the government started on the road to creating what would become the U.S. Post Office and the National Bank. The government also established a single uniform currency throughout the states under his rather powerless watch. His administration also introduced the Treasury Department, the first Secretary of War, and the first Foreign Affairs Department. He led the fight to guarantee the statehood of the Western Territories beyond the Appalachian Mountains, land that some of the original states owned. Following his tenure as president, Hanson died the following year in Prince George County at the age of 62. Elias Boudinot of New Jersey became the second president. He was originally a very successful lawyer prior to and during the Revolution. He played a major part in promoting enlistment in the area and loaning money to various commanders to be able to afford supplies that they desperately needed. He was also a major figure in the building up of a spy network when the British occupied New York City, later being a commissioner for prisoners under George Washington's command. After being a New Jersey delegate to the National Congress, he was appointed as president in 1782. His presidency coincided with the official end of the American Revolutionary War. Boudinot presided over the country when the Treaty of Paris was signed on September the 3rd of 1783. However, the Treaty of Paris did more than simply end the war. It required that the United States be recognized as an independent country and no longer a part of the British Empire. Besides being president, Boudinot was also noteworthy for his era for advocating for the rights of both Native Americans and the black populace, as well as directly sponsoring various youths among these groups so that they could receive an education. When the US government was formed in 1789, Boudinot was elected to one of New Jersey's House of Representatives seats, a position that he'd hold until 1795, where he was appointed as Master of the Mint by George Washington. Coming in at number 3 is Thomas Mifflin. Yeah, Mifflin. Mifflin was a merchant and politician based out of Pennsylvania. He served as an aide to George Washington during the Revolution, raising to the rank of Major General. Mifflin's most important duty as president was to accept on behalf of Congress Washington's resignation on December the 23rd of 1783. After the war, the importance of Congress declined so much that Mifflin had severe difficulties in convincing the states to send enough delegates to Congress to ratify the Treaty of Paris, which finally took place on January the 14th of the following year. Following his tenure as president, Mifflin would later become the first governor of his home state of Pennsylvania, a position that he'd hold until December of 1799. He returned to the state legislature, a position that he'd hold until his death a month later. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia served as the country's fourth president in 1784. Lee was a statesman who was likely most well known for the Lee Resolution, the motion in the Second Continental Congress calling for the colony's independence from Great Britain, being one of the first officials calling for independence. Lee's Congress was rather active during the first few months, passing numerous legislation, including establishing a US dollar tied to the Spanish dollar for the national currency. His most pressing issue was in trying to settle the state's territorial disputes over the Northwest Territory. Throughout his term, Lee remained steadfast that the release of states' territorial claims on the Northwest would enable the federal government to fund itself with land sales, as getting loans from other countries weren't exactly viable, and he was opposed to the idea of federal taxes. While this was achieved, the federal government was far too weak to actually keep the piece of this land, which was populated with Native Americans who obviously opposed the vast majority of land claims. So in total, Lee's plan for funding failed. Later in life, he did become a vocal opponent of the now current US Constitution, out of the fear that it would create a centralized government too similar to the government that the colonies lived under as British citizens. He would also hesitate because the document lacked a Bill of Rights, though many of his later suggestions were incorporated into the United States Bill of Rights. John Hancock, most famous for his big-ass signature on the Declaration of Independence, held the position of president in 1785. This was the second time that he had held the office of president. In 1775, he presided as the president of the Continental Congress, a position he'd hold until the end of 1777. I know, they had so many presidents and so many different systems, it's confusing. His life in politics began long after the presidency, and he helped to fund the American effort during the Revolutionary War. His life in politics continued after his tenure as president in 1785, a position that he didn't really seem to have gone on or worked on at all. As stated previously, the importance of Congress diminished heavily post the war, and Hancock likely didn't want to bother trying to get the states to send delegates with his failing health. John Hancock would later run for the vice presidency, even with his health concerns, aiming to serve under Washington, but failed to net the Electoral College votes needed, with that position instead going to John Adams. Nathaniel Gorman served as the president following Hancock. Born in 1738, Gorman served as a delegate of Massachusetts to the Continental Congress, as well as a well-off merchant. Like many other presidents during the time, his presidency was simply another item on his long list of political accomplishments. He began his career as a public notary who quickly won election to the colonial legislature during the war. He served as a member of the legislature, became a judge even though he lacked legal training, explain that one to me, and even attained the Constitutional Convention where he supported the new US Constitution following his presidency. The seventh president of the United States was a man from Ohio named Arthur St. Clair. St. Clair was a soldier under the British during the French and Indian War, and later settled in Pennsylvania, becoming one of the largest landowners in western Pennsylvania. He became a colonel with the 3rd Pennsylvania Regiment and saw action during the Quebec invasion, and was later promoted to Major General on February of 1777. Clair was the commander of Fort Ticonderoga during the British Saratoga campaign, where he was court-martialed for his controversial failure, yet was later exonerated. Clare was elected to serve as a delegate to the Congress in 1785, which he held for 2 years. On February the 2nd of 1787, the delegates finally gathered together and elected St. Clair as president. During his tenure, showcased one of the major rebellions within the United States, that being Shays' Rebellion, a topic that will get a separate video in the future. Congress enacted its most important piece of legislation during his tenure as well, the Northwest Ordinance. And time was running out for the Confederation Congress, however. During the St. Clair presidency, the Philadelphia Convention was drafting a new United States Constitution, which would abolish the old Congress. He left Congress after finishing his term, and he then received the appointment to governor of the Northwest Territory, a position where he often faced off with the Native Americans who claimed that they, in fact, owned the land, which they kind of did. Despite once being enormously wealthy, St. Clair ultimately died poor, with much of his wealth used to support the American Revolution and the young government. Cyrus Griffin, outside of having a badass name, was from Virginia and had a background in law before he became the 8th and final president of the United States under the Articles of Confederation. He helped to put the country's new judicial system on the path to become what we have today as a modern American court system during his work at the Court of Appeals in cases of capture. He continued to contribute to the new country's court system after his presidency, when he went on to become a judge with the District Court of Virginia, and he later served in the U.S. Senate from the state of Virginia until his death in 1810. I hope you enjoyed the brief look into one of the lesser known aspects of history. If you have any topics that you would like me to cover in the future, say so down in the comments below. If you would like to assist in seeing the channel grow, consider donating on my Patreon page. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time.